Ladies and gentlemen, FTP Radio back up against your neck. What is that? Up against your neck? Yeah, let me tell you something, man. A couple weeks ago, Jill Scott and Erykah Badu got together. And for all the people who never understood the term Black girl magic, they were introduced to Black girl during that versus, right? Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, I'm about to introduce you to another slice of Black girl magic. See, let me just say this, man. Racism, we've been talking about it all day. Racism is ubiquitous in American culture. So you've had a lot of Black people who have suffered from emotional and psychological trauma in this country. And oftentimes, when we do build up the nerve to go see a therapist, it's usually a therapist that isn't our color and not from our culture and not from our experience. And then there's a disconnect with the person that's supposed to be able to help us. Mm-hmm. When I tell you this is the Jill Scott, Erykah Badu version, I'm telling you, this is a mental health warrior. When I met her at the KJLH Men's Empowerment meeting, and we talked about relationships, and we bounced off of each other really well, and it was very powerful, and the audience was affected by it and raised up by it and inspired by it. So was I. This sister, her name is Epiphany. That's on Instagram. Her name is Miyume. I gave out a damn Instagram name. Her name is Miyume. She got that sauce. She got that magic. Please introduce yourself to the people that are watching this show. Please introduce yourself and tell them what you do and who you are and who you're bringing on.
So, nice to meet you guys. My name is Miyume McKinley. I am a licensed mental health therapist. I am the owner of Epiphany Counseling, which is located in San Pedro, California, but we also have a site in Beverly Hills, as well as offering telehealth services in California. And by the end of the month, we are expanding to both Texas and Georgia. With me, I have an amazing guest who is also a clinician at my practice. Her name is Cierra West. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and we are excited today to be talking about trauma, racism, trauma and racism, and how that impacts our mental health.
So do I need to just get out the way so you can bring your girlfriend away so y'all can heal? We need healing right now. That we have suffered a societal wound, and I'm bringing in the spirit doctors to clean this up for us. Can we do that?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, I'm gonna get out the way.
So he'll be bringing in Cierra West. Hi, Cierra.
Oh, how are you?
Good, good. I'm so glad that Cierra was open to joining me. So Cierra is a clinician at Epiphany Counseling. We both work with individuals who have trauma and across the board. And I asked her to come on today with me because, as O said, we are suffering from a societal emotional wound, and specifically those in communities of color and Black people are triggered. We're triggered. We're triggered. And all I continue to think as I watch the news, as I watch the clips, as I read the feeds and the comments is trauma, trauma. I remember first texting Cierra and saying, there's going to be so much trauma. We have to do something, but not just trauma from the perspective of those who are in the protests, who are seeing these things, who are there at the forefronts, but for those watching, those Black people who are relating to this by watching to the news and saying that could be my sister, that could be my mom, that could be my dad, that could be my brother. It's across the board. So we want to provide an opportunity to talk about how racism, trauma specifically associated with racism impacts our mental health. And I don't think we can do that without, bringing in intergenerational trauma and talking about those things. So thank you so much, Cierra, for joining me in this discussion that I'm hoping will change some lives.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for the invite. It's been
So
a long day.
it's been a long week. I think it's been very emotional, and even from the perspective of a therapist, I think this is maybe the first time in all my years of being a therapist where as a collective we're all sharing the same pain and hurt as a lot of the clients and individuals that we're serving. And so today what me and Sierra would like to do is just offer drop some nuggets, some things for you all to think about, because I think it's impossible to think that our mental health is not impacted by everything that's happening right now. And our mental health impacts every aspect of our lives, our academic performance, our school, our work, how we interact in our relationships, our family systems. It impacts everything. And so I'm going to ask you for just a moment. Believe me, I know the stereotypes. I know the things we grew up hearing. You know, therapy is for crazy people. Therapy is for white people. Black people don't go to therapy. You pray about it. You go to church. We can go on and on. And I'm asking you for a moment in time to put those ideas, those thoughts, those myths on the back burner and really tune in, because I think what we have to say will offer some healing and also change your life. So, Sierra, what were your thoughts when I asked you to come on and talk about trauma? Your first thing was intergenerational trauma. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, my first thought was like, I was just so grateful that there's so many platforms now to have a space to talk about these important topics that we need to talk about. So I was really grateful of that. And what came up for me first was, yes, intergenerational trauma, which is also known as transgenerational trauma, which is basically just the transmission of historical oppression, any negative consequences from one generation to the next. And I deal with this on so many levels on a day-to-day basis because I do specialize in trauma. So it is a big piece of what I do. So I'm always exploring that, always talking about that. And like you said, I mean, it affects every single aspect of our life. And it doesn't start with us, and it definitely isn't going to end with us. It goes back and back, generations and generations and generations, back into enslavement and beyond. And we carry this on, of course, like a biological level, but also a psychological and a social level that I don't think most of us are aware of. So I was really grateful to have this experience to like jump into that, talk about it, what it looks like, and definitely some things that you can do to recognize it and get help and support for it.
Yes. So if you never heard the term, I want you all to think about intergenerational trauma. So a lot of you may think that's psychobabble. What does that really mean? What does that look like? So let me break it down for you. Me and Sierra came up with a list of things, and I think you will be able to understand. So what does it look like in our communities? Are we ready? Don't play your music too loud. Don't wear a hoodie. You have to work twice as hard as fill in the blank. Don't embarrass me in front of these white people. I can't get that car because the police will bother me. I've had friends tell me that. I'm not going to tint my windows as they'll give them a reason to stop me. Don't talk back to the police no matter what they're saying. Keep your hands in sight at all times. Don't go through that neighborhood, they'll bother you if you have a nice car. Don't just be hanging out there, they'll think you're about to start something. Did I miss anything? The list can go on and on.
Right, right. No, the list definitely goes on. Um, and I think what's important to also acknowledge is those are some of the thoughts and beliefs we have, and they affect us subconsciously as well. A lot of times we're not even aware what's going on. Me myself too, I go into a store and I'm constantly mindful of like, oh, my phone's ringing, but if I put my hand in my purse, they're gonna think I'm stealing. It's just, you know, driving down the street, you see a cop and you're following every single rule in the book, and you start to really question everything, almost to like, oh my gosh, did I steal this car? Because it is so embedded in us, the fear. So yeah, those are some of the thoughts and beliefs. I definitely want to talk on in which we explore too some of the effects of how it comes out like in behavior. So we
Yes.
had talked about like unresolved emotions. So that can look like a lot of anger or aggression or sadness, depression, however you want to term it. Unhealthy behavioral patterns. So you start to notice that you are repeating the same behaviors and cycles in each of your relationships, whether it's an intimate relationship, relationship, family, friends, whatever that looks like. Substance abuse is another big one. Just finding different ways to cope with it. So that can look a lot of different ways. Abandonment issues, and we talk a lot in psychology about attachment issues that goes hand in hand. Low self-esteem, personality disorders, and we talked about last night, just about low self-esteem and like how that affects our esteem as Black women and just even African American men. You know, we grew up not seeing people like us. Like when I was growing up, I didn't see therapists and doctors that looked like me. And then we were constantly shown in magazines and TV that, you know, white is beautiful, that the lighter your skin is, the more beautiful you are, the more eccentric you look. And that affects our self-esteem and how we view ourselves and how we view the world as well.
And even with some of the things that we're talking about, when you hear don't go outside or don't do this or don't do that, or even the conversations that Black parents are having to have with their children right now because of all of these things that are, can you think about how that would impact somebody on a psychological level? If from a young age, child, you're having to explain to someone, while because the color of their skin is different, they may be treated differently. Can you think that starts with the underlying you're less than? That's not what we're saying, but when we are doing these things, when we're having to explain why we're different, it can easily go there and leave this underlying feeling of not being good enough because you have to do everything twice as much or twice as better as everyone else. And so when you talk about trauma, when we talk about generational trauma, it's how the impact of these things, police brutality, everything that we're seeing now is going to impact how we treat our kids, going to impact how they treat their kids, their perception of the world, everything. And so when we talk about therapy and healing, it's, can we pause? Can we talk about how this is really impacting us on a mental health level? So not to say we're not going to be angry, not to say we're not going to be sad, not to say that we're trying to numb anything or avoid it, but how many of us in our households had healthy expressions of feelings and emotions? Because in most Black households, you are told what happens in house stays in house. You don't tell your business, you push through, you move forward. Once again, generational trauma. And I think what we have to recognize right now is a lot of the things that were healthy within the community at certain points in history, such as maybe keeping business in the house or not sharing certain things, might have been helpful. But now when you can't get on social media without seeing something that reminds you of the injustice, we have to talk about it now. We have to acknowledge it. If we don't acknowledge it, we live in two realms, which is anger, where we're super ticked off about it, or everything's okay. And we have to learn how to tease out these emotions and how some of these things are impacting us, like Cierra said, not just behavior wise, but mentally, and how we feel about ourselves, because that impacts how far we go, the decisions we make, the roles we play in society, the jobs we encounter, how we think about ourselves, all of those things. So I want to go back to what Cierra was saying. When you were bringing up how it impacts our body. So PTSD, let's look at that. All of us have heard that at one point or another. You hear a lot of it associated with vets, right? War vets. They come back, but PTSD is something that the entire world could possibly be experiencing right now because of just being exposed, especially people in Black communities where there's such an outcry. And so it's always been there. It's always been there. It's just more on camera now. And how that will, how that could possibly, or how it's been impacting us traumatically and how it could possibly. So Cierra mentioned health-wise, she mentioned behaviors, toxic things. So I want to specifically talk about symptoms associated with PTSD. Can we hone in on that for a moment, Cierra?
Yes.
In terms of the nightmares, hypervigilance, which just means, very paranoid, flashbacks, emotional dysregulation, which is just another way of saying 1 minute you feel like you're up and down. You feel like you're all over the place. Emotions. And I've had clients this week say, I don't even know how I feel, Mimi, or that's what they call me sometimes. It's I don't even know how I feel. I'm mad, I'm angry, I feel hopeful, but I feel hopeless, all over the place. And it's hard to contain those emotions. Racing thoughts, sleep disturbance. Did I miss anything, Cierra?
Appetite fluctuation, inability to focus, dissociation is another word. There's times when you're just like, wow, there's so much going on that you're not. I mean, even myself, like if I catch myself saying like, is this really happening right now? Like, is 2020 really taking place? Like, we're really going back in time. And then just with the quarantine and all these other factors, dissociation is definitely is a big one for a lot of the clients I'm working with that I'm starting to see.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I want many of you to think about the things that we're saying, the nightmares, the flashbacks, the coping by drinking or smoking and things of that nature, just to escape the reality because it's too heavy to feel. I'm sure you can identify either yourself or various people within your family that engage in some of these activities and behaviors. And the unfortunate thing is in our communities, this has become a norm. So going back to intergenerational trauma, this trauma has become a norm. And I was having a conversation with someone today, and it made me think. We were talking about the vets coming back from war, and they go to war, and I don't, I can't say that I know exactly how long they're gone for, but I do know it's not all of their life, right? They go for a significant amount of time. They come back, and we have all of these programs in place. There's the VA, there, and I'm not, I've heard stories about how quickly people can get help, so I'm not going to go down that route. But my point is that it's recognized that these people have went to a war zone, and when they come back, when our vets come back, it's understood that they've been exposed to some things and they need help. It's accepted and it's understood. In Black communities, what they experience over there to some degree is experienced every single day. So it is a constant ongoing thing. And how can we not acknowledge that growing up in certain areas or being police brutality, this being across the skin that you're in causing so much trauma would not lead to any type of mental health illnesses and issues. So we acknowledge it on one platform, people going to war, but for some people, every day is a war zone. And so just imagine that ongoing every single day, day in, go out, what happens to your mind? What happens to your response system? There's a reason why you can have a crowd of people from various sides and something sounds like a gunshot and certain people run off and don't even need to know what's going on, right? Our triggers, things of that nature. So me and Cierra talked back and forth. I'm like, how can we get so much information in 30 minutes? Like, what do we want people to recognize when it comes to this police brutality and how it impacts our mental health and how this has been so very triggering for so many people on so many different levels. So, and I want the Black community to really pay attention to your triggers because, yes, it's hurtful to see, but for those who have experienced things in their own lives, this has been a very triggering time, a very triggering time. And it's caused a lot of pain. It's caused a lot of hurt. It's caused a lot of anxiety and worry, a lot of self-esteem. Cierra, anything you want to add? Because I can get on a roll here.
Yeah, I think it's really important too to kind of talk about like how, and again, I'm a therapist, so I'm not stepping outside of my scope, but just talking a little bit about like how the brain works with trauma too, so people have a better understanding like what's happening. Because I know for most of us as humans, like we have compassion, we have empathy. So like you watch news and you see sad stories all the time, and you're like, wow, that hurts. But I think with George Floyd, watching that for some of us, including myself, like it hit so much harder. And some people were just like, I don't understand, like where is this coming from? And that's that piece too of the intergenerational trauma, because it is broken down into our DNA. When our brain, when we have some type of trauma, it captures that. So for those of us who've had experiences with police or just racism and oppression and all that, which most of us have, when we're watching these unfortunate videos, it's almost as if our brain and our body is telling us that we are experiencing that original trauma that we had before, on top of like our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, and so and so and so and so, all that trauma, our body is now reacting to all of that. And if you don't have that awareness, you don't know what it is, it's very scary. And you see all these symptoms like you talked about, and then we go to the unhealthy coping or low self-esteem, all that stuff starts to play out. So I know we had talked about really hoping that our message is to gain a better understanding of what that is, so you can get support for it, and talk about like some different coping strategies and stuff like that could be beneficial as well.
Absolutely. And so there's research that shows that trauma is kept in the body, right? And it can be passed down from generation to generation. So when Cierra is saying back to slavery days, our ancestors, this is very true. And I've worked with people, and actually doing a Instagram live with a colleague of mine. He's a Black male, and he was stating this, I've been pulled over by the police before. This brought that up for me, but this feels different. Like this hits very differently. And all of us have had different experiences with racism, I think, at one point or another in our life, or you at least know someone who has. And so I like that you brought attention to that. It's kept in our body. Like, pay attention to where you feel it. For me, I've been nauseated and had a headache all week. And I think it speaks to just, it's part of our DNA, and we want to be aware of what's happening for us, what's coming up for us, what it reminds you of. If you had another family member who was a victim of police brutality, if you yourself was a victim of racism when it comes to the police, when you yourself had racist experience in schools or work, offices, wherever across the board, when you were treated differently at the doctor's office, it brings all of that up for you. And it's important that we as a community find healthy ways of dealing with it so we don't pass these same unhealthy behaviors, these same undiagnosed mental illnesses, these same things that change, unhealthy behaviors down to our kids and their kids, and that we have to heal, we have to start with recognizing it ourselves, understanding how this impacts us, being open to change, and recognizing that therapy, I don't care what you term it as, talking to someone, whatever you want to deem it as, is an opportunity for us to break generational cycles. That is what I look at therapy as, is an opportunity for us to break generational cycles. So you've heard me and Cierra talk about some of the symptoms of these things, and I'm looking at the time and I know it's winding down, but I want to say this: when we do not heal our trauma, our emotional wounds, it looks like insomnia, there's substance abuse, so a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse in our communities, because a lot of people, we aren't taught to talk about our feelings. We're not taught to identify them, and we're not taught to talk about them. So when we don't do it, we suppress it all, and it comes out as medical issues, high blood pressure, I mean, I'm sure some of the stuff we eat contributes to that too, and our mental health. And our mental health, when we keep those things in, it causes that we can't sleep, poor communication. You're trying to get along with family. How many families have broken apart because people can't seem to be on the same page? That's trauma. That's trauma in our communities. How beautiful would it be if we could come together, identify what we're feeling, and be able to communicate that in a healthy way amongst each other? How many more communities would get along? How many more families wouldn't break apart? Poor academic performance. You heard Cierra say we wouldn't be able to focus. How can we do well at our jobs in school if we can't focus because we're having flashbacks from someone getting beaten, or flashbacks for something that happened in the neighborhood? Or my entire walk from my house to school, I was worried about getting shot or being pulled over by the police, and now I'm sitting in class. How can I possibly focus? Right. And I'm not even gonna get into the whole school system, all of that.
And
That'll
I'm
be.
glad you did bring the school system up just real quick, because even as a mother, I do want to chime in on that.
Mhm.
I think it's important for everyone to know that anxiety, depression, however you want to label it, all these different behavioral patterns, it looks a lot different in children than it does in adults. And I think it's really important that we recognize that, because we can dismiss it in children, or a lot of times it's like, oh, it's bad behavior, or they're acting up, they didn't sleep, and it gets dismissed and swept under the rug. And it's not always the case. Sometimes it does mimic, but we talked about some somatic symptoms that might show up, behavioral problems. You see the kid acting out more physical aggression, more anger, poor concentration, difficulty focusing, all of that. And like you said, the academic part. And we see this in the schools. I worked in the schools. We see it all the time. And it's like, when I was in the schools, that was my first thing. It was like, well, what's going on in the home? Like, let's look at the whole holistic piece, not just the behavior.
I want to read something really quickly. This is a book I have for those. It's called My Grandmother's Hands, and they really talk about racialized trauma. And I just want to read an excerpt from it because it really hit home in terms of what we're talking about. Um, It says, as many researchers now believe, the ongoing violations of the Black body and heart have resulted in a widespread trauma. This racialized trauma shows up as an array of adaptive but dysfunctional behaviors, which is what me and her are talking about, including hypervigilance, heightened anxiety and suspicion, ADHD. All kids, especially in Black communities, there's always misdiagnosis of ADHD and conduct disorder, OCD and addiction. It also can appear as dysfunctional and non-adaptive behaviors such as disordered thinking, difficulty concentrating, panic attacks, learned helplessness. We could do a whole show on that. Self-hatred, hopelessness, depression, and a survival reflex that tends to involve violence. The last one, a survival reflex that tends to involve violence. When your brain is on alert every day, all day, a majority of the day, you're living in a constant mode of survival. It almost desensitizes you to some of the things, some of the responses that others would have in other situations. So like Cierra said, we want to stay in our scope of practice. But I'm hoping that we're relaying the importance that, especially after being exposed to everything in the media, how important it is for us to take control of our own mental health so that we can stop some of these unhealthy patterns as a result of trauma that we're passing down. I bet you don't think of saying to your child, you have to work twice as hard, as being traumatic. Right. But we have to look at the underlying message it sends, and we have to rewrite the narrative and change this. You're not good enough because of your skin color, or you're going to be looked at as less than because of your skin color, and really change the narrative to, wow, you're so worthy of everything, that it's possible that people will be intimidated by all that you bring to the table. That's a very different message. And so I'm hoping that we'll bring that home. Do you have any last thoughts, Cierra?
Well, no, I'm glad that we have this space to talk about it. And I really hope that if anything, you walk away with like trying to remove, destigmatize mental health. It's so important. It's no different than you going to the doctor and getting a checkup. Same thing, go talk to somebody. If it's your counselor or pastor, whatever it is, just talk to somebody. But I really hope that you guys walk away with that message that therapy is powerful and it's an
Therapy is
essential
powerful.
component to healing. Very essential.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you all with a question to think about, and then I'll give you all our contact information. Have you thought about how what's happening now impacts your perspective of yourself? What is the underlying theme of this constant state of anxiety and paranoia that we all live in? From a young age, what does this do to a person when when these messages and unspoken rules are given to them that they're not good enough when they're watching the television? And what is the fact that we have to have a different conversation with our children? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for that child? And the last thing I want you to think about is, what is the internal monologue that you have about your race, about how you feel, about what's going on in society, and how is this being played out currently in your actions and behavior with yourself and with your family? Thank you guys so much for giving us the time to talk about this. You can find myself on Instagram at Epiphany_Miyume. If you are in the California area and open to counseling, please contact us. You can go to our website, www.eccts.com. And you can find myself there, or Sierra. Sierra, you want to give them your Instagram for Mend Your Mental?
I'm on Instagram under Mend Your Mental, and that's mend_your_mental.
Yes, MEND, Mend. So thank you guys. Feel free to DM us, ask us questions, and we'll be more than happy to help you on your journey to healing, hope, and peace of mind.
Thank you all.